Welcome to Science Lesson 2. Yesterday you read about what science is. Hopefully you got that science is the study of God's world. Well, today we're going to talk about where scientists work and what tools they may need in order to do their job. But before we do, let's do a quick review of our scientific method. Remember, there are 4 steps of our scientific method. Can you read those 4 steps? Now, you'll notice that we use this early on in our year to do different kind of science experiments. Well, now we're going to talk about it in more detail. Okay, so we are going to now talk about the tools that scientists use and where they may be using those tools. So, what kind of cool tools do you think scientists use? I hope you said a lot of different things. Maybe you said a ruler, maybe you said goggles, maybe you said tongs to pick up stuff. There's many different tools that scientists use. So a scientist uses different tools. His tools are very different, but very important for his job. So let's talk a little bit more about that. If you don't have your science book, pause the video, grab your science book, and open up to page 5. Now that you have your science book and you've opened up to page 5, let me read the terms to remember words at the box, at the top of the page or the middle of the page. Laboratory is a place where scientists work. It's also called a lab for short. Magnify, which makes things appear larger. And then a graph is a diagram that shows data. That would be in our step 4 of our scientific method, where you're showing your results. So you may be wondering, where does a scientist work? Scientists work in labs or laboratories. Okay, now in the labs or the laboratories, there are tools that scientists need to use in order to do their job. Some tools could be a hand lens, which we know as a magnifying glass, which makes things larger, because sometimes things are small and we can make it larger using the hand lens. And then we have a microscope. Some things that scientists are looking at, or even we are looking at, we can't see with our eyes. So we have to use a microscope in order to look at things that are not easily visible or seen with our eye. They're very, very tiny. And then we have a telescope. Some of you may have a telescope at home and you use it to go outside and look at the stars, or maybe from inside and looking out and look at the stars at nighttime. Okay, so those are just some tools that scientists use. Now, some other tools, we have seen and even used some of them in our math class. And you may be wondering, what does math have to do with science? Well, scientists use the tools, some of the tools that we've used in math. For instance, they use a ruler. Maybe they need to measure something, and they use a ruler to measure that object. They use a scale. Now, we haven't necessarily talked about using a scale, but we have talked about measurements. We've talked about how many cups, how many grams, how many milliliters. We have used measurements that could be used on a scale. So that shows how much something weighs. Some of you have scales at home, and your mom or dad use it to see how much you weigh to see how much you've grown. There is something called a beaker that is used in a scientific laboratory, which holds liquid or measures liquid. It looks very much like a measuring cup that your mom or your dad may have in your kitchen. There's a thermometer. We've learned how using thermometer can tell us the temperature outside, but we know that we can use the thermometer also to measure our inside temperature, and then scientists often use it as well to show how hot or cold something gets. And then there's a stopwatch that scientists often use to tell time of whatever they're experimenting. So once they have used these tools, they will use graphs to show their data. Their graphs could be something like we've talked about in the past. We've talked about line graphs, bar graphs, and then there's also a circle graph, which looks like a pie. But here's an example of what a bar graph might look like. Okay?